Okay. So one of the critical questions about trauma and trauma-informed care is to ask the question, what happened to you? You know, when you run into people who are acting out, people who are mean, they're angry, they're defensive, you know, instead of saying they're bad people, you can step back and ask the question, uh, I wonder what happened to you, right? So a person that's trauma informed will always ask that question. So the question is, what is trauma, right? So trauma is a painful injury, physically or emotionally, right? Um, it's the lingering effects of a painful incident, physical and emotional. So a lot of hospitals have a trauma center, and that trauma center is where they provide surgery and medical procedures to persons who have had a traumatic experience, like a gunshot wound, a fall, right? All kinds of traumatic experiences. People come into these hospitals in the emergency room. It could be um, they've fallen down stairs. They could have been in a fight. Um, they could have been stabbed. Could have been a car accident. Could have been a gunshot, right? So that's the physical side of trauma, right? Could be a, a sports accident, right? So that's a painful injury when you think of trauma, but it's also an emotional impact, right? So what are the emotional impacts? So that's the lingering effects of a painful incident, right? That painful incident could be physical or emotional. People could have a traumatic experience from abuse, verbal abuse, domestic violence, right? Uh, we were over at the jail, and we have an outreach ministry to a pre-release center, and there were some people who were incarcerated, and they were incarcerated for verbal abuse or verbal domestic violence, right? So, so the key is, right? The key is not why are you doing that, but the key is I wonder what happened to you. Not all scars are visible, but they are impactful. So what are the causes of trauma, right? So the causes of trauma could be things like bullying, verbal put downs, shaming, fights, arguments, poverty, poor housing, environmental issues. That's called community trauma, right? So sometimes when people walk out of their home, in some communities, they're walking into boarded up buildings, houses that there was a fire and has not been raised. Kids are walking by, standing water. So the built environment is also a form of trauma. So there's also family abuse and incest, community violence, early childhood trauma. We're going to learn something that's called ACEs. Write this down, ACEs, ACE, apostrophe S, ACEs. That's adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences, right? So that's early childhood trauma. It's what it's called. So sometimes when you understand a person's background, it makes you wonder, this person really never had a chance because of adverse childhood experiences. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Um, then there's intimate partner violence. You know about that. Medical trauma, a car accident, home base accidents, shootings, physical abuse. Weather could be a form of trauma, depending upon where you live, right? Um, Social events, racism, oppression. There was vicarious trauma when George Floyd was killed. There was vicarious. So, what is vicarious trauma? That's trauma that spreads. I didn't experience it, but I'm impacted by it, right? Tamir Rice created unresolved grief for some youth, vicarious trauma for some youth, right?
Tell me,
So,
oh, I'm sorry.
so social events, racism, oppression, grief, sudden death, fear, and anxiety, those are all causes of trauma. So, what are the types of trauma, right? So sometimes we have one, and sometimes we have all of them. Okay, so what are the types of trauma? So one is the acute, what's called the acute trauma. That's from a single incident. Could be a gunshot wound, a fight, right? Um, it could be continuous domestic violence that a child witnesses in the home, right? So that incident, right? It's a single incident. Then it's something that's called chronic trauma, which is repeated and prolonged, such as the domestic violence, right? So in some instances, you know, there is a bullying incident, but then chronic trauma is where there's constant bullying or there's domestic violence on a constant basis, right? Then there's also called complex trauma, which is exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events all occurring at one time. And if you think about this, right, there's some people who live, when you go back to that list of the causes of trauma, there's some people who are who are in a complex traumatic environment. So I live in poverty, I'm poor, I'm being bullied because of it. You know, I have a mother that has a chronic illness, she has a mental illness as well, right? I have a brother that is a drug addict. He takes pills, and it creates so that's complex trauma. And there are, if you think about it, there are a lot of people that we will be dealing with in your church, um, people who you're caring for in your family. For some of us on this call right now, you're already looking at your own upbringing. Some are looking at their own current environment. I probably trained over 200 people in the last 4 or 5 years, and I've had a couple times where people said, I said, "Hey, why you didn't come back on?" So I just couldn't handle it because it just made me think about what I was going through at that moment or what I went through as a child. Okay, so the other interesting thing is issues associated with the brain and dealing with trauma, right? We're not going to deal with a lot of this, but over the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a couple of doctors come on to really talk about the impact that trauma has on the brain, right? And that's where this whole concept of being traumatized, right? Um, we're going to see in a minute this whole thing called fight and flight and freeze and fawn, right? So there's a couple of things about our brain. So one there is the reptilian brain, which is houses the instincts, survival instincts with physical responses such as heartbeat, breathing, hunger, and thirst. And when we have a traumatic experiences, it impacts that, where people have what seems like a seizure, right? Then there is the mammalian brain, right, which helps us process emotions such as joy, fear, and regulates our attachment style. So just think when a person has had complex trauma over a long period of time, right, and that portion of the brain is shut down, right? So their ability to distinguish between joy and happiness, between fear and anger, to be able to, the brain helps us sort out what is real, what is not real, right? What I should be afraid of, what I should not be afraid of. That's a healthy instinct, right? That what allows us when we're walking through a community in the dark or we are alone in the mall, our brain has receptors. But just think if that's on heightened alert. So sometimes in both the reptilian brain and the mammalian brain, it gets stuck. So you can get stuck where everything is big and everything is on, sorry about that, where everything is on, where a person is always on heightened alert over small things, right? Now, there's also called the neo mammalian brain. And now this is really challenging about trauma and its impact on the brain. So where it impacts our sensory processing, things like learning, memory, decision making, complex problem solving. So this helps us see, that trauma impacts the brain. Well, one way of describing it, and a Dr. Ramirez, and hopefully I can get her on. She's very busy. She's one of the psychologists at the hospital, can come on and do a trauma training. And she felt it was okay for me to describe it this way. If you can think of trauma, if you take your fist, and trauma is all of this emotional stuff, and this is your brain, right? So just think that every time there's a traumatic, and we can feel this too, that when there's a traumatic event, it's like this trauma is hitting on your brain, you know? And so when we experience trauma and the overexposed brain shuts down, burns out, so to speak, we can deplete ourselves of these essential responses. But the good thing about it is that the brain can be rebuilt through happiness, joy, and through periods of less trauma, right? And so what's important to understand is that all of these traumatic experiences that kids are having as young people, and that's why when someone, if you heard us all say, we say this before, right? I wonder what that kid was thinking about, right? I mean, it was as if, like, I know someone um, described it to me that they had gotten robbed by someone and they were arguing with this person, and they just felt that this person had no feelings. They could just sense that there was no mental processing of the consequences. So what the study of trauma and our understanding, our community, is that what we want to do is to help our kids get healthy, right? This is why people will say, I did not feel anything, or I just don't know why. Now, if you think about it, right? So if you look at this thing, so that complex problem solving, right? But the good part about it is that resiliency, we're going to talk about that the brain can be, you know, healed. And so when people have had these traumatic experiences, if they hurt people, right? And so if you have this complex trauma and you're not in a safe environment where people are helping you process your experiences, then we stuff it, and then we have further experiences that repeat those feelings. We all have gone through that. So, but before I move on, I'm going to pause and I want to just ask the question right now. What is your wow moment for anything that you've heard so far? What stands out to you as a wow moment for anything that you've heard so far?
Hi, this is Kim. Wow, that's as I sit here, last night I watched Maxine's Baby with Tyler Perry, and everything that you have talked about thus far was everything that Tyler Perry actually went through. And if anyone has a chance to watch it, you will see everything that Bishop have talked about so far that Tyler Perry actually went through because his father abused him growing up. And he actually, even though he didn't know the terminology that Bishop has presented us with, it's everything that Tyler Perry actually mentioned, the the chronic, the chronicness of him being abused and how he just kind of like went out of himself. And it's like right now I can actually put words or terminology to what Tyler Perry was speaking about and how he felt and what he did to overcome the trauma that he experienced. And it's just I'm just like at a wow moment, and I'm just like keep like in my head I can see visions of listening to Tyler Perry and listening to Bishop with the different terminologies and what Tyler Perry went through.
All right. Wonderful.
It actually goes hand in hand, like to
Wonderful.
a
Okay. Anyone else? One other person?
My wow moment would be the different brain responses and to understand how when you do experience these different traumatic events, why you freeze and you do have that feeling of numbness and confusion as if it's like an outer body experience when really it's just your brain responding to the situation that you're in.
All right. All right. Let's move on. That kind of speaks to this next section. So what are the typical responses to trauma? And this comes out just through the history of mankind. If you think about this, whole study goes back to how our bodies from a DNA standpoint goes back um, to the early days of human existence. And we learned the brain and how the body reacts and the instincts. Those are protective factors. And so we respond to external danger or trauma in these four ways, right? And sometimes they can be healthy and unhealthy. So number one is to fight, right? So when you're in a matter of a traumatic experience and I sort of fall into the fight and flight mode. Even now, I have to like catch myself, right? And I'm gonna show you an example in a minute. So the first one is in the midst of a danger, is to fight, respond with anger and conflict, right? The next one is flight, avoidance, to isolate, to run. I'm in the middle of a conflict. I turn to I look at the I look at the uh, I'm faced with some kind of issue, right? And so you're in the middle of a conflict. We have a tendency to just want to run, to abandon it. I don't want to deal with it, right? I'm known for saying, you know what, I'm through with it. I'm through with you. I'm through with the situation. I'm just through. Now, another way that we respond, typical response to trauma is through freeze, feeling frozen, unable to do anything, just numb, right? Where a person just, they halt. You can see people in a meeting, right? They just, it's another way of saying shut down, right? Then another way is to fawn, which is the most unhealthiest of it, but it might be the most healthiest at that moment is what's called fawn, which is people pleasing, pacifying, stuffing one's own feelings to get out of it. And when you think about domestic violence situations, you think of abusive situations, which are different types of traumas, right? Uh, people can fall into that fawn. And it's a typical way of responding. I mean, so if this training was done, say, to women who have experienced physical abuse or domestic violence, I bet you a number of them would easily fall in um, a few of those categories. You know, it's like, oh, that relationship, we just fought the whole time, right? Or, you know, when traumatic happened, you know, I just went in my room, isolated. I just didn't want to deal with it, right? Or, you know, a person just froze. You know, I mean, it's just, and when that freezing, sometimes our whole lives can shut down, Could you imagine someone that's in a complex traumatic relationship over a long period of time and they're stuck in the freeze moment? You talk about their, their goals, their dreams, and all of that, right? Then the other side is that, hey, you know what? I just did what I had to do to get along. So one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that your church, your usher board, particularly your hunger program, your youth program, become trauma informed, right? And so what are the principles of trauma informed, right? Is that um so the first one is that we need to try to create a safe environment. We have to ask the question about our churches and all that we do. Is it a safe place? Is it an abusive place? Right? Number one, have we established and create an environment of trustworthiness and transparency? Right? And so another concept for being trauma informed is having peer support. Are we empowering people who have gone through abusive, traumatic experiences, if it's former incarceration, if it's drug abuse, or if it's adverse childhood experiences? Are we empowering them to be supportive to other persons who are hurting? And then, it has to have an environment of teamship, collaboration, mutuality, right? So if you think of a ministry team at a church, these principles are so important, you know, or we have people in charge who just do anything, say anything? Are they abusive? They treat people any kind of way. There's no trust. People, I would never talk to them about my business. So how are people going to heal if you have that kind of environment, right? Where there's not a team effort, where people are working together, where the food ministry is working very strongly with the youth ministry, and the youth ministry is working very strongly with the dance ministry, because it takes all of that to help people, heal and create this healthy environment. So the other thing is to be about empowerment and choice, right? Now that's important as you work with people. So if you look at this for you as a care ambassador, right? You're working with someone. You went down the street, you ran into someone. You're not their counselor. You're not any of that. You're just trying to help them get the help that they need. What's important is that they have to feel safe. They have to have trustworthiness, where there's transparency with trust, right? And then identify, but the other thing is also about empowerment, not to push them down the road, right? You're working with someone and you know that they say, well, what are your goals? Well, I want to, open up a barbershop. Well, the person don't have a GED yet, or they need to go to a reading class, right? So because if they go to barber school, they got to be able to read, right? And so you have to be delicate in how do you guide but still empower, and how do you help with still giving them the power to make choices, right? Then we have to be prepared to deal with cultural, historical, and gender issues, right? When it comes to, people outside of your culture, that means that if there is a Muslim family, because we're all Christians on here, if there's a Muslim family that you're working with, are you going to spend your time trying to help them, or are you going to spend your time trying to convert them, right? Then there are historical issues, about them as a family, where they come from, their backgrounds, all of that. Then there are gender issues that we just can't send people to hell on, right? This is not the evangelistic ministry. This is the healing ministry. You know what I'm saying? So we want to help people get whole. Then once they get whole, they can make then the spiritual doctrinal choices that are important for your faith community. Okay. So those are the principles of trauma-informed care. right? So the key is recovery, right? And being trauma informed. And the key is to become a trauma champion. So I'm gonna tell you a story of, I use this story, it's part of a TED Talk thing I do, right? So there was a little kid, probably 12, 13, stays with his mom. She's on drugs, right? He has complex trauma in his environment. Every night, he comes home, eat chips, might get a pop. Every night his house is a party house, and people, are there partying. His mom is in another room, people coming in and out. He's in a room with his two little brothers, and then he goes to school the next day, and repeatedly he falls asleep in class. This one day he falls asleep in class. The teacher says, "I'm tired of you. I'm sending you to the principal." So the principal sends him home. He says, "You've been to me every week. You've been to me. We're going to suspend you for 3 days." So he's walking home, right? So there's two possible things that could happen, right? So number one, he walks home. He goes to the door. His mom opens the door. She cusses him out. "You aren't this. You aren't that. You always stay in trouble. This and that. I hate you. Da 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 da. You're just a bad kid." And he goes in the room and slams the door. Right. Another possibility is he's on his way home, and Mr. Jackson, who's a deacon at the church, he also is part of the youth team at the Boys and Girls Club around the corner. He picks him up. He says, "Louis, what you doing?" He said, "Mama, they put me home, da 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 da. What did you do?" "I fell asleep in class." He said, "Okay, get in the car." So he puts him in the car. He rides back up to the school. He goes to the principal's office. He said, "Look, are you aware of what's going on in this kid's home? Why are you sending him home? Sending him home is worse than him being in the class sleeping." He said, I tell you, Mr. Glenn, I promise that I'll come to school every day and check him. I promise that I'm going to have him in my class, right, at our youth group at the church. I'm going to make sure he's part of the Boys and Girls Club youth team. I'm going to be there for him. Please allow him to get back in school, right? So which of the incidents was he, and I'm introduce you to a new concept. A new concept is called re-traumatize, right? Re-traumatize. So I'm gonna call on Miss Wilson, right? So in which incident was there a resiliency champion, right? So let's talk for a minute about resiliency. Resiliency is the ability to bounce back, okay? It's the ability to bounce back. It's the ability to deal with trauma, okay? So there are resiliency champions all around in the community, in your family, at the school. These are people that help people bounce back. These are people that help people heal. So in one instance, there was a person that re-traumatized, and then in another one of the stories, there was someone that was a resiliency champion. So, Miss Wilson, which of the two incidents was one that he was re-traumatized, and which incident was there that he ran into a resiliency champion?
So that being taken out of class into the principal's office and then being sent home and just tossed out. That's his re-traumatization. It's just happening all over again because once he goes home, it's going to start that cycle of mom being upset, whatever they go through at home. So that just starts it all over again. She'll be upset half the night. She'll fight with him. And of course, the fact that he'll be home for the next few days is going to upset her. So that throws him right back in the pit he just came out of. And then that champion that came along to divert what was going on for him, to give him something positive, something to believe in, something to belong to.
Right. And so here is the rule. So the rule in trauma-informed care is to do no harm, right? And that's in our conversations, is what we preach about, is what the ushers do at the back of the church, right? Here is another story that happens at the Baptist church everywhere, right? Everywhere Baptist church or everywhere Pentecostal church, right? Uh, you know, there's church service going on. The pastor's preaching. He's preaching. He's looking at something's going on at the door. You know, you're in the choir. You're looking at what's going on at the door, right? And there's a usher in the back arguing with this woman who comes every other month asking for food in the middle of service. Now she's back there arguing with her and fighting with her, and I hear the preacher's trying to preach. You're in the choir trying to sing, and you see this going on, right? Where everybody in the church, but apparently the ushers don't understand. Everybody in church knows that this guy that comes, he's just a homeless guy that got a mental illness. All he wants is $1 or a cigarette. And so why are you back there castrating him, talking about him, arguing with him as if he's some bad person? He is not a bad person. He is a sick person that needs help.
Mm, mm. Amen.
And so there are times in which churches need, with ushers, it can be the same story with the feeding program where you see the people giving out food. This person, come on, man. If you look, if you attend the church on East 131st, just like I do, everybody see this guy walking up and down the street. You know what I mean? So why are you arguing with him because he's coming up here wanting an extra bag? Give him an extra bag and send him on home. Right?
Amen.
So
Amen.
what the community needs are trauma champions. And that's what we want to be. We want to inspire trauma-informed communities, right? Where we understand what is going on and we become resiliency champions. Now, so our project is based on, you know, trauma-informed and community participatory research, right? Where what we're trying to do is to understand what's going on in the community. All right. So what are our program goals? So number one is to increase community awareness of trauma, train community care teams, increase access to healthcare and support service, and to manage healing circles for collaboration and training. That's where we started, right? So the core ambassador training that we're going to go through is trauma one-on-one, care team development, and that's what we're dealing with today, right? There's going to be more stuff being offered that you can come to around understanding trauma-informed care, understanding resiliency, understanding how to develop your care team, right? When we come back on Saturday, we're going to deal with resiliency, grief, what is social isolation, and what is a proper trauma response, wellness checks. And then ongoing, we're going to deal with there's going to be some trainings offered around grief and spiritual distress, grief, trauma, community and violence, and success planning and linkages to services, right? So for our program, there are 4 pillars. So number one is the healing circle. That's all of us together. Then number 2 is training and capacity building that can occur for you as a trauma captain. Then you can go back to your church and we can give you a tool to kind of determine what kind of training will be good for my church. If it's a pastoral care training and trauma training for associate ministers, is it a behavioral health boot camp for your ushers, your feeding program people, your Sunday school people, people that are public facing? I think everybody that's public facing should have at least a day-long training on behavioral health boot camp. That's introducing them to the different types of mental illnesses that's out here in the community, people that they're facing. Then the other is care team ambassadors and care teams. And the other is crisis response. And that's part of what we're going to be doing, is kind of going into the community in teams, visiting families, and just passing out information so that people can get help. So that's crisis response, right? So what is the Healing Circle? So pillar one, Healing Circle exists as a community planning, training, and support table for the community. So us together forms a healing circle, okay? Right, the Healing Circle could also be a place where impacted people come together and support one another. So your church could have a healing circle, right? And the healing circle we're going to introduce is called Overcomers Anonymous, right? Where people sitting around a table will hear a story of someone that had a traumatic experience, what happened, what they're doing now, and what they do on a daily basis, you know, to deal with the pain of their past. So that's the healing circle, right? So then pillar two is community training that we just talked about. And that's to provide relevant and evidence-based information on trauma and trauma-informed care. It's important that we know what is real and what's not. And once again, that involves trauma one-on-one, trauma-informed care, pastoral care basics, right? Grief support, mental health first aid, we talked about that, community organizing, comfort care, and support, right? Pillar number three is the care ambassadors and care teams, right? So you could establish at the church, and you don't have to use all of these because you can decide what you want to, but you could establish, this is how you approach it in your community. You could say that my church has a friend-to-friend program. It's not a trauma program, it's a friend-to-friend program, right? Which is a trauma-informed pastoral care framework for congregations seeking to assist persons impacted by trauma and toxic stress and grief and so much, right? So it is to assist individuals and families referred to them. These teams carry out a four-step process of, now look at this. So your church, you can go back to your pastor and say, I think we need to establish a friend-to-friend program. And the pastor could identify some people who you could easily begin to support. You know, there's a young kid that, you know, got shot. He's still at the school. And the church, what did they do? They went and prayed for him when he was in the hospital. That's all they did, right? But what is it? It's crisis stabilization, life planning, right? So helping them get a success plan, then support, mentoring, and then monitoring, removing barriers, you know. So, you know, we have some stories about that. You know, a person has a plan, right? They were going to go get their GED, they were going to do this, but they haven't been going. Well, I don't have child support. I don't have a bus pass. I didn't go to interview. You know, I don't have a shirt and tie. So how do we remove barriers? So one of the things that you can do through your care team is that you can call it the care team, or you can call it the friend-to-friend program. I just think that's a little bit more friendly. You know, I'm a friend, you're a friend. We are peers, right? So here, this is important also. We're almost finished. So care teams led by care ambassadors provide comfort care. That's what we're providing by providing support, encouragement, linkages to services, right? So one of the things that we're going to link this program is to our Project Help program, and we're developing at our church, a full database of up-to-date community programs. It's one thing to give a person a booklet with a whole lot of programs in it, but sometimes that's outdated. Those programs don't exist anymore. The phone numbers are wrong. You know what I mean? So we want to link people to real services, right? And so comfort care support services are provided to persons of all ages who may be impacted by trauma, toxic stress. We're going to have somebody come to talk about toxic stress, which is another form of trauma, but it's like toxic stress, chronic illness. Chronic illness is, you know, there are people that, you know, have diabetes, they're on a breathing machine, you know, they have cancer, they're all alone, you know, which causes social isolation. We experienced that during COVID. Churches did an outstanding job during COVID. They put together phone trees and they made phone calls and they checked on people, right? So also persons receiving comfort care support often have had a wide range of adverse experiences, from abuse, poverty, incarceration, victims of crime, gun violence, a host of things, right? So the care teams can also offer, you know, various forms of support, such as food, bus passes, utilities, help, right? At your discretion and based on your capacity. So you're going to run into people as you go door to door, and it's going to astound you if you look into their door and they got 4 or 5 kids running around, and that house just looks like it was, you know. Have you ever seen a house? Have you ever seen a house where somebody moved out and they leave stuff, you know, and it's just trash everywhere, and you know, there's a torn up bedroom set. There's a, you know, I mean, some people live in those conditions every day, you know, so how can we help them, right? So we're going to provide support, encouragement, and a listening ear, right? So as I said this before, many people in the time of COVID, were experiencing various forms of social isolation. Surprising to some, but many people are alone and do not have a consistent support system, especially seniors. They come to church looking pretty, they put on their little dress and all of that, men as well, right? But many of them are alone, and you know, they have food issues. They can't get out to go get food. You know, there's a lot of crime, all of that. That's where the church can truly be a friend to a friend. So the other we talked about was crisis response, right? And so that's where teams respond to shootings, deaths, and other community emergencies causing trauma to residents and families. So team can offer comfort care by going door to door or on street corners to provide support and encouragement by offering a listening ear and linkages, you know, to services. All we can do is just offer it. You know, but people will begin to have a different view of your church when they see you not just having a revival and not just having a vigil. And I think vigils play a very important role. But the sad reality is that after the vigil, people get in their cars and go home, and that community is still there. Unlike the approach that Father Paul Abernathy has in Pittsburgh, where they set up, you know, a camper in a tent and they stay there for 2 or 3 days. They come back, they go door to door, they meet with people, right? That's dealing with the vicarious trauma that's happening around, you know, that incident. Um, so this gets into some of what we're going to be talking about next week. I mean, when we come back on Saturday, you know, how do you identify persons to support? What are comfort calls, right? And so this kind of ends for today. You know, our basic introduction, you know, to trauma and trauma crisis, what's going on in the community, right? So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about resiliency and the basic concepts of grief and grief support, right? And then what is the role of us, you know, how will we do our work, right? So Saturday's training is at 9:30. It's going to be on Zoom, right? And so it's going to go a little bit longer, but this is just a basic introduction, right? And then following that, we're going to find a time where we can get together in some small groups, and maybe we may do it, you know, 2 or 3 times, where we just can go out, you know, into your community with just, we're gonna have some bags. We're ordering shirts. They're gonna be green. We're gonna be called, hopefully we'll be called the Green Team. Green is the color of growth and healing, right? And we're ordering shirts and hats. And so when we go out, we can be identified, you know. We're gonna have bags. And so we want you also to be on alert, because at any moment, Pastor Prince, before we open it up for just discussions, I'm just going to have him give an example of how, as early as Wednesday, Saturday, one of your pastors or someone on your street, across the street, someone could get killed. And when that happens, Pastor Prince, give an example of what we can do to tell a couple of stories of some of the stuff that we've done.
Thank you. And let me also compliment you on a well done job in this presentation tonight. Let's go back to when the young child a few years back came up missing, and we searched and finally she was found in a house. She had been brutally attacked in that neighborhood, in that entire neighborhood was just caught off guard because she was just right there in the neighborhood in an abandoned house. Sometimes being on the scene is not to try to fix a problem, but just to let people tell you what their problem is. And so that was a sign of acute trauma. This past Saturday night, a pastor of a church in East Cleveland was carjacked. Became very close to being pistol whipped in his church parking lot. They took his car, took his cell phone, you know, and to him, he was just traumatized. The neighborhood, as the word got out, was just frightened to death because it happened right in this East Cleveland neighborhood. There was a fire, house that caught on fire. A couple of people died of smoke inhalation. We went all the way to Akron just these past couple of days with a young child playing with a firearm that the father left laying out. And you're going to be playing with how the law reacts to this, because this is going to be some charges brought, because you don't leave a weapon just laying out. But at the same time, you got this father thinking, I didn't have any idea that they would even go near that gun. I didn't realize there was still a gun, a shell that was in the chamber. And so how it's going to affect his family. And then just let me give one more, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
You remember the young lady that went on vacation, was gone for 10 or 12 days, came back, her child, about, a little over a year old, had died because she left the child alone. Where I got involved in that was simply through a member of my church knew some of that family from a relationship that one of their sons had with one of those family members. So when you go, you got everybody that's mad at this mother, yet you got somebody sitting over here saying, well, we knew that she wasn't wrapped tight anyway. So you just have to be there to deal with all these different emotions. And my out has always been, are you comfortable enough to have prayer with me? And I do it that way because some people are not comfortable with prayer. But I'm God's representative there. And so the only way, I want to conclude it is with prayer, but some people don't. And so I try to be very understanding of that. And one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was very good, we don't have to have all the answers. We can easily refer somebody else. And I think that's the most important thing that we need to always remember. Of all the answers that we have, we don't need to have them all. And so there was one thing, two things that you was talking about when you was talking about the 4 F's. You was talking about fight, flight, freeze. Well, most people are going to get caught in the middle with either flight or freeze because they don't want to get involved or they don't know how to get involved. They don't want to get involved is the flight, and sometimes they just don't know how. We've been in this before on several occasions to where we've been in the neighborhood and there've been people who we're so glad you're all here that they could have been there themselves, but they just didn't know how to take that first step.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been on the battle line, walking the streets with safe neighborhoods, back to school programs,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a matter of just praying within yourself, calling on your God, and just being there, and not trying to be there for answers, just being there for support. Thank you.
Yeah, that is wonderful. So, just we're going to talk about this on Saturday. So we will do everything as a group. So, like, say for example, if Pastor Washburn puts out the word, hey, there's been okay, I'm giving an example. He just mentioned that. Maybe 8 years ago, 7 years ago, we started this program called Safe Streets, right? I, along with some other pastors, I was probably the, catalyst of it, but we got pastors to respond. It was a young girl right across the street from Greater Whitestone. They found her body. She was on her way to school, right? And so that turned into close to a 2-year program for us, working with and where we had about 6, 7 schools where we walked the streets right before school started, and it was a great. It was great for the community, but it was also great for the church. It was great for pastors. That people in the community saw pastors, you know what I'm saying? Even though we got some press, but there was, we might have gotten 1 or 2 press stories out of it, but there were countless mornings, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning. We were standing in the corner walking with kids, man.
Yes, sir.
And it was just a very wonderful thing. So it's responding to the incidents, but we do it together, right? So we're going to talk about this on Saturday. We're going to talk some about grief and resiliency, right? And then we're going to talk about how we identify people to support, right? And how we link them to services. And the biggest accomplishment is just being there. Because as Pastor Prince would tell you, the sad thing about people in general, it doesn't matter what it is, members of our church, whatever, the hardest part is to get them to get the help they need, right? So it's our responsibility to at least offer it. But there are going to be some people that you're going to help. I mean, there are great stories in all of our churches and all of our lives of people that step up and get help. So I just want to kind of go around the room and just kind of hear from each of you as to, we in the mid of the program, we asked, what was your wow moment? But I want to just have each of you, if you could just put it into one word. But before we do the wow, as we close, anybody have any questions? Let me start there. Any questions? Okay, so why don't we just go around and everybody can take 30 seconds, 90 seconds, no more than that. Tell us what is for this whole today's presentation. What was what was your wow moment overall, and say why you chose that word. So I'm gonna just go with what's on my camera. I'm gonna start with my good friend, and she know what I'm gonna say. And she got a little cough, so Gina Wilson.
So one word for a while.
It could be a phrase or whatever it is.
Just that is so widespread. The smallest little thing can cause damage. It can be traumatizing, and you really do shut down. Just that one little thing, and it just changes how we live, how we think, how we go forward in life, and it's far-reaching.
Right. All right. Rick.
I find it very, very informative. And there's a lot that I just didn't understand and don't know about trauma. So I'm really excited about getting to understand more.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Kim.
Let's see, my word is excuse me. I'm still so excited. I'm just still wild. Still thinking back to Maxine's baby, and just want to be able to be there for someone, to have, sympathy and empathy for that person or persons.
Okay. All right. Kofi.
My word is conceptualizing, and I chose that word because it's about us coming together collectively, as you say, as a group, learning how to help people learn how to conceptualize healing. And people definitely need healing. We got all these folks out here hurting. They've been traumatized, some throughout their entire lives, and they need to learn how to conceptualize healing.
Okay. All right. Siobhan.
My word is resiliency. We have known to be able to push through and to have those champions go out into the community and help those who are struggling to push through these different traumatic experiences and situations. I think it shows a great level of resiliency throughout our community.
Mm.
All right. Okay. All right. Brenda Payne.
Meaningful. I think that this training is very meaningful to some of the actionable steps, and you all have given some historical things that have been done in the past in communities. And I think that we can resurrect that as we continue to learn.
All right. Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Brenda Harris.
Bishop, now your question was, what was our wow moment?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was several wow moments with this. I was just really, really just heartwarming to hear so many things about trauma. I've learned a lot of things through your session, but two things stuck out for me as well: being a trauma champion. That's and making sure that I do no harm in what I say and what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's when dealing, and that even, that's even in our homes with
Right,
our kids,
right.
with
Our family, extended family.
family.
Yes.
Yeah. Um,
Mm.
yeah. Okay. And Yolanda.
Hi. I think my word is enlightenment as I continue to enlighten my soul and my mind, and I learn new things about, I've been doing this as a probation officer for 31, going on 32 years, working in mental health and helping people. And I'm always trying to add to my repertoire in order to help people and to meet them at their need and meet them where they are. And so just to learn new information and learn new ways to help people is where I'm always at. So today I've learned some new information, and that enlightens my soul, that enlightens my spirit to be able to take new things to the table when I'm able to help people.
Okay. Dolores Gray.
I would say empathy. And the reason why I say that is because of how our communities are at this point. Most communities at this time, they are filled with trauma because of the gun violence, the violence against women as well as children. So I feel we have work to do, and we are the change agents for that.
Wow, I like that. Okay, is that Keith?
Yes,
Minister?
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My word is impactful.
All right.
And the reason is because just looking at the numbers and the statistics and how it impacts, trauma impacts us that have not been traumatized in that moment, but the trauma that it causes in the neighborhood, and how it has that trickle down theory. And then how also we can become impactful by being the change agents that I believe that Christ has called us to be. So my word is just impactful.
All right. So once again, we're gonna hear Pastor Prince's word, and then he'll give us our closing prayer. But just a couple of things. My word is excited and relieved. Historic, right? And I like to be around people that want to do something historic. I mean, I don't care how old you are. At some point, you have said, "Hey, I want to be a drum major. I want to do. I want to make a mark, right? I want to make a mark. I want to make a difference, right? And so I'm pleased, relieved we got to this point, and I'm excited. I want you to rev up your engines and have them on the runway, because I'm telling you, and you need to keep your eyes open and give me a call, give Pastor Prince a call, give Pastor Gates a call. We need to try to be there. Let's be there. And now this first phase, it might not be that you have 5 people from your church, or so that may come down the line, but we can all start on together. So we're gonna hear Pastor Prince, what is his one word and why he chose that, then he can give us a closing prayer.
I basically, it comes to 2 words: safe place. As a pastor, I see so much going on in the church, and not all of it is healthy, not all of it is good, not all of it is welcoming. And so it challenges me to work harder to create a safe space. As a film director, I would never get involved with stuff. I would always just stay away because I didn't want to, bring the urgency of my business onto the scene. But William Boyd, Elmer Boyd, before he died, he and I used to talk a lot. And he said, if I thought like you thought, I would never been president of the school board. There were a lot of things that I would have never done if I kept using that excuse not to get involved. So sometimes I think just the urgency for everyone on this call tonight, for their love and compassion of wanting to be involved and to make things better. And I'm going to say again, not to pat you on your back, but your leadership here has, especially tonight, has just been overboard. You presented this conversation very well. And I'm just happy to be on this call. Father God, thank you for everyone on this call tonight. Thank you, dear God, and for your rest and your peace that you have provided to us. and give us your strength, give us your resources, bond us together with your love to go out and save a world that's looking for a savior. Use us, dear God, to hold up this bloodstained banner to make a difference that some man, woman, boy, or girl may turn their life around and help somebody be cured and be rescued from trauma. Thank you, dear God. It's in your son Jesus' name I pray. Let the church say amen.
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 All right. Well, thank you all.
Amen.
We'll see you on Saturday. You know, for those that are involved in the program, Siobhan, we sent out the phone number to you. So there's some gift cards that is still owed, and you could possibly get both of them. And so, you know, we just want to really really get ready. I know this isn't you signed up for. Your pastor asked you just to go to a voter meeting, and now you didn't join the movement. You're like, oh my God. Yeah. So let's keep on. Yes. Yes, Sister Wilson.
Just want to give you a reminder, if you would, to get that information out to us, to get this out to us. Sometime during the week.
Okay, this PowerPoint. All right, because we don't want you to Pat Smith.
Okay, so maybe like within the next day or so we can
No,
take a
maybe
look
I
at
sit
it,
here.
refresh
No,
it for Saturday.
maybe I sit here and do it right now. How about that?
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right, everybody. God bless. All right.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.